Emma, tell me all about your podcast, please.
So it's on tour with Sport 24, which we like to think has a bit of a ring to it. And it is a podcast that I would say connects anyone that's enthusiastic about travel and sports, which is why, honestly, I thought I'd won the jackpot when they asked me to present it, because speaking personally, I've been on a number of trips where I've deliberately tried to visit somewhere and tie in whatever sport is available, wherever that might be. So I'm a big tennis fan. I'm fortunate enough that I've been to all the Grand Slams. So when I went to New York, I thought, got to grab some US Open tennis. Likewise, Paris, you've got the French Open there, the Australian Open. When we were there, I also did a bit of MCG cricket. So speaking as someone who shares this passion for sort of connecting, seeing the world with following sport, I was fully on board with the idea, and it has
it sounds like a really rubbish job, Emma. It sounds like a proper drag, that.
Unfortunately, I present it all remotely, so I'm never actually in these places. But the beauty of it is that for the podcast, we connect with people that are from these sporting cities and that can tell us all about the sport that is on offer. So it is Sport 24, that the platform that offer the podcast, and Sport 24 themselves are the first live sports channel, if you like, whether you're in the air, so on an aeroplane, or at sea. So if you're on a cruise, so if you're traveling across the sea or 30,000 feet in the air, you probably would have watched Sport 24 at some point, because they can bring you all this live sport when you're traveling, whether that's sort of Premier League football, the Olympics, Grand Slam tennis, as I've mentioned, World Cups, a bit of everything. So they already kind of connect their passengers, their sport lovers, with their love for travel. And I guess the podcast is kind of an extension of that. So once you step off your flight, or you step off your cruise when you've been at sea, it's a continuation of that, and you can kind of take us with you, and we can give you what we like to think is a bit of a guide, an interesting guide, taking you through all the sort of nooks and crannies of these cities, these sporting cities, and what makes them so iconic in that regard. You know, whether it's these big stadiums or the presence of the fans around these cities, what it is about the sporting side that makes it so interesting.
Tell me a little bit, because you spoke about the sort of the TV side of it, and I'm always interested to see how other forms of media are embracing podcasting. And is this the first sort of venture into podcasting for Sports 24?
As far as I know, yes. This is my first experience of working with Sport 24, but I think the main premise of what they do, as I mentioned there, is broadcasting live sports in television, in visual, to their passengers that are on board. So I think the beauty of this, and I think it's a first for Sport 24, is that it's available to all the podcast providers, and it's allowed them to sort of extend into that space, that you're not just limited to being a passenger on an airline or on a cruise ship watching their output there. It allows you to, like with any podcast, have the freedom to be at home, walking around in London or wherever you might be from it, and taking it in, what it's like to be in this sporting city from where you are, whether you're on the way to work. Or I think for Sport 24, that was quite important to allow that interaction between their users, the passengers that love travel, love sport, to go a step further, really, and become remote.
How have you found being part of this ever-growing podcast community? How's that been for you?
Yeah, good. I mean, I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And I think that can be quite useful, actually, I suppose, when you're presenting these kind of things, because as I mentioned there, the beauty of podcasting is that you can take it in from anywhere. I mean, I was on a flight last night listening to a podcast from 30,000 feet, not my own, as much as I love Sport 24. I don't want to listen to my own voice. But like, you've got that. You don't need to be connected to anything. You can be lying on a beach. You can be on your way to work.
Yeah.
And I think when we're trying to present this content and ask the right questions, that can be quite useful to kind of picture that these people that you're potentially speaking to are from all walks of life, all over the world. And even though we're talking about what we think are big sporting cities, people might have no idea about Madrid and what it has to offer, or Melbourne, or London, or Paris. They've just never, or Miami, never taken the time or know much at all about these cities that we probably take that knowledge for granted. So yeah, I love it. And I just love sharing knowledge. I think that's my background, and my main thing as a journalist. It's that curiosity, isn't it? And I love that we have this platform to do this and connect with so many people. I've had messages from totally random people that I know that have been on a flight and said, "Oh, I didn't expect to hear your voice on here talking about, the AFL scene in Melbourne." And that is the beauty of podcasting, isn't it? It's accessible to anyone, anywhere.
Absolutely. Well, as we record this at the beginning of October, tell us a little bit about the episodes that are currently out to date.
Yes, so the 3 that have been released so far are Melbourne, Miami, and London. So as I've mentioned there, the premise of the podcast is looking at what makes it a global city, a sporting city. So yeah, it's what gives these cities the status, if you like, as to why they're recognised on the global sporting stage. So for instance, with the Melbourne episode, we try and give a bit of variety with our guests. So I'm the presenter, but alongside me, I always have Rob Adcock, who's, as I introduced, a TikTok travel extraordinaire. So he's very much on TikTok as his platform, but with that, he travels to all different corners of the earth doing all sorts. So he's very sort of well experienced with that, and he's been to a lot of the cities that we're talking about, and he likes to do it on a budget as well, which I think is always quite nice for our listeners, because generally speaking, yes, we're talking about the Miami Grand Prix and Wimbledon and all the sort of glam that's associated with that, but let's be honest, a lot of people are traveling on a bit of a shoestring budget, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So Rob definitely gives that kind of element to the podcast too, and he'll give you little tips of how to take things in, perhaps, on more of a budget, which is quite nice. So we'll have people like, we have Rob joining us on every episode, and a lot of local people attached to these cities. So with the Melbourne episode, as I mentioned there, we have sports commentator Peter Mercato, who's travelled globally. So he kind of understands, I think tennis is kind of his main thing. So he'll talk a lot about the Aussie Open, but he'll be able to compare that with if you've been to Paris, go and watch the French Open or Wimbledon, which again is quite a nice way to connect to our listeners.
Yeah.
So we get a lot. We've had broadcasters, commentators. We had an AFL fan who, on the ground, was just so enthusiastic and telling us all the nuances and ins and outs of AFL, a lot of which I didn't know. And then also athletes who have played in these sporting arenas that we're talking about. So again, the Melbourne one, we had former England international cricketer Stephen Finn talking to us about what it's like to walk out, on a Boxing Day Ashes test.
Yeah.
So really, I think we like to think we kind of encompass all different ranges. You've got the athletes who have been in and played on the grass in these arenas. Logan Sargent, a F1 driver, he's driven the Miami track. He's from Miami. But then with that, because he's from there, he can tell us what it's like to live there and where to go and eat and what the kind of typical food and drink is in these places. So yeah, it's kind of all angles covered, we'd like to think.
Wonderful. And what can we expect moving forwards?
So like I mentioned there, Melbourne, Miami, London are the 3 episodes we've done so far. Madrid is in the pipeline. And I think Paris as well might be the next one that we're homing in on. So plenty more episodes to come. And wow, the beauty of this is there are so many sporting cities to explore. So the possibilities are endless, really. I just need to get onto them about doing one remotely that's not in London. Because, yes, it was amazing to go to Wimbledon, but I wouldn't mind a crack going over to, I don't know, somewhere else across the world to take him some sport elsewhere. Maybe some Serie A football in Italy. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
That'd be well all right, that. Wonderful. And if people want to check out the podcast, I mean, I guess it's like saying, pick your favourite child. But if you was to say to a new listener, like, go and check out the podcast, would you say start at the beginning, or would you say, do you know what, this episode, we really, really kind of found what we was set out to do with it?
I think the beauty of it is you don't need to listen to them in chronological order, and that's kind of why it works. Because I personally will listen to a podcast. I have series that I listen to religiously, but if there's something I want to find out about, so often I'll search it and I'll be, has anyone ever talked about it? Like, for instance, this journalist, Millie Bright, the England Lionesses captain, right? I wanted to find out more about her. So this morning I've listened to a couple of podcasts that she's on giving interviews. So if you're traveling to Melbourne and you think, oh, I would wonder what, you can research blogs and stuff on the internet, can't you? But I think the podcast or stratosphere is another place that you can do this kind of research. So my advice would be, give them, at the moment it's only 3 out there, so it's not too much to be time taken up anyway. They kind of all offer the same thing, as I've mentioned there. You've got people on the ground that know the areas really well, a bit of humour in there with Rob, some broadcasters that can tell you the ins and outs of their experience there, and then the athletes as well. So yeah, I'd like to think from the word go, we've hit the ground running. But I suppose the listener will be the judge of that. But yeah, get stuck in on any of those episodes. They were really good fun to record. So hopefully they're good fun to listen to as well.
Wonderful. And people can listen to that on all usual podcast platforms.
So available on all audio platforms. I understand it has been picked up by some airlines, and some airlines that don't even show Sport 24 their output. So, which again, though, I think reflects that there is this general appetite for sort of connecting sport, travel. So yeah, Sport 24, on tour with Sport 24 is the podcast, all audio platforms. Join us, because that's why we did it, for you, the listener.
Lovely. Emma, thank you so much.
No worries at all. It's been really nice to speak to you. And next thing I'm going to do is Google Corsica for summer 2024.